The wind that morning carried a chill sharper than winter should have allowed. Marcus Callahan stepped out onto his porch, steaming coffee in one hand, boots scuffing against the wooden boards. For a moment, the day felt ordinary, the kind of dawn that promised work and peace in equal measure. Then his eyes fell on something that made the mug tremble in his grip. A brand new chain-link barrier stretched across the dirt road leading into his pasture. At its center stood a gate, solid and cold, with a lock the size of his fist glinting under the rising sun. His cattle were milling nervously just beyond it, penned in like prisoners on their own land. Marcus lowered the mug slowly, setting it on the railing without looking away. He had fought storms that flattened barns, coyotes that snatched calves, and debts that nearly drove him off the land. But this was different. This was human. A challenge written in steel and arrogance. He stepped down onto the dirt, every stride, heavy with disbelief, and whispered to himself, "What in God's name have they done?" Marcus Callahan was 52, with a back bent from years under the sun and hands that told stories through their scars. He had come to this stretch of countryside 3 months ago, trading the chaos of Dallas traffic for the sound of cicadas in the trees. His dream had been simple: mornings spent riding the fences, evenings leaning against the porch rail, and the steady rhythm of cattle work that calmed a restless heart. He had saved for decades, selling his small construction business and pouring everything into this spread of land. To him it wasn't just property, it was a second chance at peace. But as he walked closer to that foreign lock, dread coiled inside him. He thought of the signatures he'd scribbled at the title office, the stack of covenants he hadn't bothered to read line by line. He thought of the neighbors who had mentioned, almost casually, that the Lakeshore Heights Homeowners Association liked to stay involved. He hadn't counted on that. He had pictured freedom. Instead, his dream now stared back at him through a padlock. When he reached the gate, 2 men in neatly pressed polo shirts were tightening bolts into the posts. Their truck bore the HOA logo, neat and smug in bright lettering. "Morning," Marcus said, his voice steady but his chest tight. "Mind telling me what this is?" One worker ignored him completely. The other muttered, "Talk to the board." And then came the sound of tires crunching gravel. A sleek black SUV rolled up, spotless as if it had never seen a dirt road. Out stepped Eleanor Briggs, HOA president, with a smile carved sharp enough to cut glass. She wore a red blazer and dark glasses that reflected Marcus's baffled face. Clipboard tucked beneath her arm, she called out, "Mr. Callahan, we've notified you of your known compliance. This is corrective action." Marcus stared, jaw tightening. Known compliance with what? She tilted her head. "Perimeter fencing must meet community standards, yours does not. Until corrected, this measure remains in place." He gestured toward the cattle clustered in confusion. "That's my access road. My animals drink from the creek beyond that fence. And that land," he pointed firmly, "isn't yours." Eleanor's smile stayed thin, controlled. "The access easement is under HOA authority, Mr. Callahan. You signed the covenant." And with that, she turned back toward her SUV. "Contact our office when you're ready to comply. Have a pleasant day." The gate clanged shut, the lock clicked, and her heels tapped against the gravel until she was gone. Marcus stood frozen, sweat chilling his skin despite the rising sun. That evening, his neighbor Henry Torres came over. Henry was a retired truck driver, weathered and blunt, who had lived in the community for 20 years. Over coffee at Marcus's kitchen table, Henry shook his head. "She's pulled this before," he said. "If Eleanor doesn't like you, she'll bleed you with fines until you fold. She's got the board wrapped around her little finger." Marcus rubbed his temples. "I didn't come out here to play games with a committee. This is my land." Henry gave a short laugh. "Then you'd better be ready for a fight. She won't back down. And she sure as hell won't give you that key unless you play by her rules." Marcus leaned back, staring at the ceiling beams. He had left behind the noise of the city to build a life carved from honesty and labor, not paperwork. Yet here he was, fenced out of his own road, challenged by a woman who measured power not in acres, but in signatures. That night he couldn't sleep. The land wasn't just dirt. It was sweat, sacrifice, and every dream he had banked on. And he wasn't about to let it be caged by arrogance. The next week, the letters began. Each envelope bore the HOA seal like a taunt. The first listed his fines $50 per day until his fence aligned with community aesthetic standards. The second claimed his property, posed a visual inconsistency detrimental to neighborhood appeal. By the third, Marcus read the words aloud in disbelief. "Visual inconsistency," he muttered, shaking his head. "I raise cattle, not garden sculptures." At the feed store, neighbors avoided his eyes, though a few whispered quick encouragement before retreating. Others kept their distance, fearful of drawing Eleanor's notice. At night, Marcus sat at his kitchen table, the letters spread before him like enemy flags. He began keeping a folder photographs, receipts, every notice logged carefully. The fight wasn't only about water or fencing anymore. It was about principle. If Eleanor wanted a battle, Marcus would meet her on the field, armed with truth and persistence. But every day the pressure grew heavier. Every morning the fines piled higher, and every hour the weight of isolation gnawed at him. He was learning fast this wasn't just bureaucracy. It was a culture built on fear. One evening, after a long day hauling extra water tanks for his cattle, Marcus spotted something odd. A small parcel of land near the locked gate bore a brand new sign. For sale. It was just a strip, barely half an acre, but it held the gate squarely in its boundaries. He stood staring at it, the gears in his mind turning. If he owned that lot, he would own the gate. And if he owned the gate, the HOA's lock meant nothing. He drove into town the next morning and sat across from his lawyer, Tom Everett, in an office that smelled of old paper and fresh ink. "Is this legal?" Marcus asked, spreading the notices on the desk. Tom adjusted his glasses. "They're working within the covenants you signed. That's the bad news. But if that lot is separate, and you buy it, you'd have every right to control access." Marcus nodded slowly. "Then Eleanor can't stop me." Tom leaned back. "Not if she doesn't know it's you. If she finds out, she'd block it. You'll need cover." Marcus left with his mind blazing. That night, he called an old friend to act as a front for the purchase. Quietly, secretly, he began preparing his countermove. But secrets don't last long in small towns. By the following week, Eleanor's SUV was parked near the gate more often, her sunglasses fixed in his direction as though she could smell defiance in the air. At the HOA meeting, her voice carried like a gavel. "Standards protect our community, and exceptions will not be tolerated." Marcus listened quietly, hands folded, while neighbors debated mailbox colors and lawn ornaments. When his name was called, Eleanor's eyes glittered. "Your fence is not compliant," she declared. Marcus stood tall. "My fence keeps my cattle in. That's what matters. This isn't a golf course, it's a ranch." Murmurs rippled through the room. A board member cleared his throat. "Rules are rules. We can't make exceptions." Marcus met his gaze. "You already do. 3 houses down the road have mismatched fencing. None of them are locked in." Uneasy shuffling filled the hall. Eleanor's smile froze, her jaw tight. "Those are under review," she said. "In the meantime, your fines will continue." He returned to his seat, his folder heavy in his hands, but his resolve heavier still. The purchase moved forward under the cover of his friend's company. Every night Marcus checked the paperwork 3 times, making sure no loose ends betrayed him. He hauled water, mended fences, and acted like nothing had changed. Yet his heart raced each time a car slowed near the lot. Finally, one gray morning, the deal closed. His friend handed him the key, a heavy silver thing that felt like a weapon in his palm. Marcus drove home in silence, pulled his truck to the roadside, and walked to the gate. He slid the key into the lock. With a metallic snap, it opened. The gate swung wide, and his cattle, thirsty and restless, streamed toward the creek. For the first time in weeks, Marcus breathed deeply. The land felt his again. But victories have a way of drawing storms. 2 days later, Eleanor arrived with 2 board members and the sheriff. She stepped out, heels biting the gravel, eyes blazing. "You've trespassed on HOA property," she said coldly. Marcus leaned against the gate. "Not HOA property anymore. Check the county records." One board member shifted uneasily. The sheriff scanned the deed Marcus handed him, then nodded. "He owns it." Eleanor's jaw tightened. "We'll see you in court." She turned, sharply retreating to her SUV, but word had spread. Neighbors had gathered along the road, whispering, watching. The battle was no longer private. It was public, and the town was picking sides. Within weeks, the fight had spilled across social media and coffee shop counters. At the local diner, some slapped Marcus on the back, calling him a fighter. Others muttered about troublemakers. Eleanor rallied her allies, pushing for emergency amendments to HOA rules. Meetings grew tense, voices raised, threats veiled and sharp. Marcus stood his ground, each argument met with calm defiance. "This is about control," he told the room once, "and no one here should have to live in fear of a clipboard." The murmurs grew louder, neighbors shifting from silence to support. Eleanor's power was cracking. The final battle came in court. Eleanor, immaculate in a tailored suit, sat flanked by attorneys. Marcus, plain in boots and denim, clutched his folder of truth. The judge listened as arguments flew covenants, easements, rights of access. Eleanor's lawyers thundered about community integrity. Marcus spoke simply. "This is my land. My animals depend on it. They locked me away from water, and I fought back the only way I could." The courtroom fell silent. The gavel came down. The purchase was valid. The gate was his. The HOA was ordered to pay his fees. Outside, sunlight spilled across the courthouse. Steps. Reporters shoved microphones forward, but Marcus only said, "This was never about offense. It was about not letting someone take what's yours just because they think they can." At the ranch, he leaned against the gatepost, watching cattle drink freely again. His neighbor Henry joined him, handing over a cold bottle. "Feels good, doesn't it?" Marcus smiled. "It feels right." The months of fear and fighting had lifted, leaving behind something stronger. The neighbors, once silent, now questioned rules allowed at meetings. Fear had cracked, courage seeping through. Marcus knew Eleanor wouldn't vanish, but she had learned. Her power had limits, and as he stood in the shade, the breeze tugging gently at his shirt, he thought of the lesson carved into his bones by the struggle. The moment you stop letting others write your rules, you begin living by your own. And if you've got your own locked gate, whatever it may be, don't assume you have to accept it. Ask questions. Push back. And if the fight is worth it, don't stop until the key is in your hand, turning open the lock that stands in your way.